The film Extinction event depended heavily on special effects, mainly blue screen or chroma key. So here is how some were achieved, mostly using Adobe Premiere. We couldn't get actors to an observatory, so some footage was shot of a telescope. The actor was filmed against a blue screen, the non-blue edges were masked out, and he was repositioned correctly. Chroma key then combined the shots to give. Our astronomer had to work a supercomputer, and Jodrell Bank very kindly allowed filming in their control centre. Here's the background, and here the actor, as shot and after masking off the edges and repositioning. And here's the problem. When the shots were keyed together, the high contrast between the two scenes left a black line around the actor's head. The answer was to export a frame into Photoshop, black out the lighter areas, and bring it back into Premiere. Controlled blending of the two clips gave a much improved background scene that keyed in better with the actor. Another scene involved the astronomer watching a simulation on a monitor. We started with a general shot. The simulation was produced using 3D animation software. This was shrunk and positioned within the monitor's screen. Having filmed the actor against a blue screen, he was dropped in to give the finished effect. Exactly the same method was used for other scenes in the observatory. Some are more convincing than others because of better matches between the foreground and the background shots.
Yes, I did speak to someone.
And the first rocks have arrived, painted lumps of furniture foam. A few were dropped directly onto the actor's head, and more were added, both in front and behind him, using blue screen.
Oh, bugger!
To get the victim under the pile, he was first shot simply lying on the ground. Next, a pile of pebbles was filmed on a blue screen, and shadow added. To give movement to the actor's legs, more pebbles were filmed, which were being slightly shifted. A mask allowed the two rock piles to be seamlessly placed over the actor, along with a little smoke, to complete the effect. Walter, our hero, now had to catch some hot meteorites. Fortunately, he's a good juggler, so he only had to make the rocks glow and smoke. He caught the artificial rocks, hollow and filled with smoking rags. A few small fireworks were filmed, made to move, and keyed in, some in front and some behind. Glowing spheres, created in Photoshop, were then added, with movement to match the meteorites. It gave Sorry, Scunthorpe, but some place had to take a whipping. It started with a still desert scene. Bunches of leaves were spun on a thread and then made to move. The third element was the sign, made in Photoshop and distorted to give some perspective. Added together, we got...
So, gentlemen, for just $10 million sponsorship,
one of the conference room scenes. We couldn't find a real conference room, but fortunately I had filmed one a few years beforehand. We just needed to change the speaker. A still frame was created and the speaker's area cloned out. A mask was then drawn to cover just the area where the original speaker appeared. A mock sign was also made and the clips put together to give a new conference room, minus its speaker. The new presenter was filmed against a blue screen and a mask drawn to match the tables and the chairs in the background shot. This is how they looked together. And once inserted into the background, we had a new speaker.
So, gentlemen, for just $10 million sponsorship, your new slogan could be, when the heat is on...
The next scene was much simpler and needed only an actor and a blurred background.
When the heat is on, only Comic Coke will do.
The real Comet stores were too smart for our needs, so a more modest establishment was filmed instead. Signs were made, distorted to match the shop's perspective, and simply put in place. Our anti-heroes were not the brightest characters and were easily amused. A simple shot was filmed and its brightness and colour altered to give a better appearance. Premiere's titling function was used to make the window frame, and brightness and colour changes keyframed in. Mixing with some straightforward fireworks gave the meteorite hitting the sea began with a simple shot. Premiere's distort filter first gave it a twirl, and then the colour was altered, and finally a bright flash was keyframed in. A shot of a rock thrown into the sea was then selected, magnified and slowed down to make it seem much larger, and a mask was prepared to select only the parts wanted. A few frames of an explosion were then given some motion, and the whole combined to give a tidal wave heading for London would be fun, so the Thames Barrage was filmed. The sideways shots were a blend of sea waves, some with swirls applied, distorted and moved across the screen. Placed over the background, this gave but the waves were in front of the lampposts, so they were simply drawn back in. A chap on the beach taking it all rather stoically. There was no blue screen available while filming, so the blue sky was used instead. A mask was drawn to eliminate the few white clouds, and the actor flipped to face in the right direction. A small wave was slowed down to look bigger. The tiny model boat was given some blue waves along its hull, shrunk down and made to move. For a bit of extra realism, seagulls were added, and the final effect was the Statue of Liberty. A photograph of the statue had its background replaced with blue, and some waves were added to the base, which, with a straightforward shot of the sea, gave not yet good enough. So some breaking waves were slowed down, reduced in size, masked off, and added. Now for the real villains, the rocks and the comet in space. The stars were just pinholes in some black plastic sheet, and a scaled-down model of the Earth was added. The rocks were lumps of cement and gravel spinning on a thread, 14 of them altogether. Give them some motion, and add them to the scene. The comet itself was done in the same way, but as every Armageddon fan knows, it needed jets. So we started with some steam from a kettle, made it move to match the comet, repeated it several times, and got. Next, the comet needed a tail or coma. Drawn in Photoshop and made to move, it was given a ripple and added to the comet. The rockets were drawn in 3D animation software and made to move. The flames came from a propane torch, multiplied up and moved to keep pace with the rocket. Add a Photoshop comet and some stars and put it together. To make it a bit more convincing, we needed several shots in technical locations, but few were available. Here the actor spoke in front of a blue screen, and put over a shot taken through a bookie's window and thrown out of focus, we got.
I think we're going to make it.
We did get to shoot inside Jodrell Bank Observatory, and I wanted to include this pan from the telescope to the control desk, but it was too slow and in the wrong direction. So, now the actor.
It's not working.
Make him move to match the background and.
Blast! It's not working.
Look! We're moving! We're saved!
The actor,
We're saved!
the local college, something new for the screen, and a sign to cover the untidy decor. Add a flashing message to give a new background scene. And finally, insert the actor.
Look! We're moving! We're saved!
This is the public library. Tweak the colours, brightness and contrast, and add a few signs, add some flashes. Next, add some sound to give.
T-minus 30 seconds.
The crowds had started to arrive, but it needed more pace, so the picture was split into two with a mat. The left half ran at normal speed, and the right 10 times faster. Together they gave... The real star was Sidney the cat, who clearly based his performance on Gromit the dog. He was made to read by waving a crisp back and forth. His paws were cut from a photograph and stuck to the edges of the book, and when put onto the cat gave... To make his eyes roll, a still frame was exported into a morphing program. A mask for just the eye sockets, then allowed the rolling eyeballs to be inserted.
You're right this time, mate. Really nice.
We couldn't film in either Westminster or Whitehall, especially with someone wearing a police flak jacket. So Westminster Station was shot by itself. The actors performed their roles, plenty of colour correction was applied, and the two combined.
You're right this time, mate. Really nice.
What do you know about it, mate? I'm the one who...
The same method was used for Whitehall. This is the background, this the actor, now with his speed adjusted, and together we got... And again. Filming outside of Downing Street would have been especially tricky, so...
Where do you think you're going, sunshine? Where do you think you're going, sunshine? You can't come in here, there's a crisis on.
The Prime Minister and all the...
Through the gates for our reporter. It started with the background suitably cleaned up. This is the background policeman, made a little fatter. Next, the professor, cleaned up, and we have... Had a few meteorites. Shoot the reporter, and put them all together to give...
preparations. And meanwhile, there are very many very large hot rocks starting to fall.
The London Eye sequence started with a straight shot, lasting for several minutes. It was speeded up about 500 times to give... But you'll notice that the boats and cars are also speeded up. So, as with the tube train, a mat was drawn that separated the wheel itself from the road and the river. This allowed the speeded up version of the wheel on top to be combined with the natural speed shot of the boats and traffic, joining the normal and fast shots, and adding a meteorite that hit at the right moment gave... Later in the film we needed a vicar, but our actor turned up with a huge plaster on his nose that needed explaining away. Well, why not have some fun? Here's our vicar, who, after exporting all the frames into Photoshop and removing the plaster, looks like this. Add some fireworks, make them move, and... Now for a few million people jumping in unison. The people were mostly dried peas on pins, being pushed loosely in time with each other through holes in a blue painted board. Several shots were taken, each with different perspectives, and suitably masked off. Then, taking a plain shot of Trafalgar Square, 18 lots of peas were first added, each sized and positioned to cover a particular part of the original space. Add a further 18 layers, and a further, and eventually we end up with... Not bad, but still rather unconvincing. How to distract the eye from the ragged edges? Well, a few Trafalgar Square pigeons. Start with a cardboard shape, multiply it into a whole flock, and add it to the scene. The same method was used with Whitehall. Several layers of jumping peas. But this time with a few layers of real people in the foreground. Still a bit ragged though, and this time some railings were added to hide the join. So that's how it was done. But getting it halfway right was a real...